Well, a warm welcome to this talk. It's Tuesday, the 26th of July now. We've known for some time now that there's been a mysterious outbreak of hepatitis, severe inflammation of the liver in children. Now, this is fairly rare. It's occurred in about 33 countries, I think, so far, but it's actually fairly rare. But when it does occur, it tends to be very serious. So I was just looking at some data from Ireland, and 90% of people, or children who suffered from this, were hospitalised. Now, the bottom line of this video is that UK scientists have discovered that this disease is probably caused by a new type of virus, or a virus which is not new, it's known about, but it's not talked about very often. It's certainly not monitored, called adeno-associated virus. So this is a virus, but it normally co-infects with other viruses. And this adeno-associated virus, type 2, has caused co-infection with adenoviruses, ordinary common adenoviruses, which are very common. And in a few cases, herpes virus. So it's this co-infection. Now, what seems to have happened here is children, everyone's exposed to these viruses, especially adenoviruses. They're just a rite of passage for human beings. Everyone gets them, but children that were subject to lockdowns and lived under restrictions were exposed to these viruses later in life and probably didn't develop immunity as normal. This seems to be the main factor. There is some possibility that we'll look at the very end of this video about adeno-associated virus type 2 mutational change. But it looks like the main factor is the immunity which people have not built up. Serious condition. Many of these children have required liver transplants, which is incredibly serious. And I'll be giving you a few things as parents to look out for as well, the classic symptoms. So let's get straight down to that now. This is what it's about. So the bottom line is it looks like we've discovered, or the UK scientists have discovered the cause of this adeno-associated virus causing these severe cases of very bad acute hepatitis. So that's what this is about. Let's go straight into the detail. So serious outbreaks of hepatitis in children. The first case in the UK, in England, I think, was reported on the 20th of March, so quite new. Children are under 16. Most of them have been under the age of 5, actually. 35 countries. UK, there's been 12 liver transplants, 2 in Ireland. Now, this is remarkably serious. First of all, there is deaths, of course, because the idea that organs for transplant are available is not true. That they may or may not be available. And even when people do have an organ transplant, they've got to take immunosuppressing drugs for the rest of their lives. This is a really serious thing. I mean, it'll get them over the acute infection, but it's not as if it's curative, because you're left with this problem of having this transplanted tissue in your body for the rest of your life and requiring these drugs. Now, it was curious because no single virus had been identified initially. So this is from the Health Protection Surveillance Centre in Ireland, which produces some very good materials. So hepatitis viruses, they review A, B, C, D, E, not detected. Now, these are the common types of viral hepatitis. Hepatitis A, which is normally infectious hepatitis. Hepatitis B, which is normally a serum hepatitis. Hepatitis C, which is also a serum or sexual hepatitis. And these are the common forms of hepatitis that are well known, but it was none of these. It was none of those. So this is something different that was being investigated. So they've been excluded. No link to current COVID infection status, and there is no link to COVID vaccines. Everyone is saying this. I'm satisfied there's no link to COVID vaccines. Most cases, or many cases at least, were not COVID vaccinated. So it's COVID related in that it's caused by the steps we took to mitigate COVID. It's not caused by COVID itself, and it's not caused by the vaccine. And this new research actually is completely consistent with the previous research that information came from. Now, symptoms of hepatitis. Classic 3 symptoms of hepatitis. Pale grey coloured stools. Your poos are pale colour. Dark urine and jaundice. And these can all be explained by the what we call the bilirubin, the breakdown products of the red blood cells. So it's not going into your gastrointestinal tract as normal, so the poo is a pale colour. It is going into your urine, so your urine is very dark. And it is going into the skin, which gives first the whites of the eyes, and then the rest of the skin, this yellowish tint called jaundice. They're the classic features of hepatitis to look out for. And that's confirmed by the Irish data here. Other symptoms to look out for are more general, so those top three are fairly specific, the classic three. But what you would expect: muscle and joint pain, fever, feeling sick, feeling unwell, tired, generally unwell, loss of appetite, abdominal pain, itchy skin is more specific. Itchy skin can be a terrible feature in jaundice, and it's caused by the irritation of these bile salts in the skin, irritating the receptors, the neuroreceptors in the dermis. Very, very itchy some of these patients can become. So that one's more specific, but these are all fairly general symptoms. So it's a post-lockdown phenomena, could well be two common viruses spreading again after pandemic lockdown. Children that would normally be exposed at an early age, not yet been exposed, getting this kind of double whammy from two viruses infecting at the same time. Children exposed later than normal. Now, this is a preprint, but it's from some of the most eminent doctors and virologists in the United Kingdom, so there's no question it will be published, and obviously it's been internal reviewed. London, Glasgow, very reputable institutions, so I have no quibbles with the quality of this data whatsoever. It will be peer reviewed, and I would imagine with essentially no changes, but let's have a look at it anyway. Now, they did a detailed investigation of 9 cases. Doesn't sound a lot, but when you see the data, it is convincing. 58 control subjects. Median age was just under 4 years of age, 4 boys, 5 girls, so pretty young. Now, they presented with a preceding subacute history. So what happens here is the child was a bit ill, and then a week or several weeks later, they developed the acute hepatitis. And very often the symptoms that they complained of were classic adenovirus symptoms, as you would expect, like tummy aches and vomiting and diarrhea. And they can also cause runny noses and cold type symptoms as well. As we say, a very common virus. But in this case, preceding subacute history, abdominal pain, diarrhea, vomiting. So it seems to be a gastrointestinal presentation of the adenoviruses between 1 to 11 weeks prior to the acute hepatitis. Now, they use sequencing from real-time PCR and sequencing, so very, very thorough. So this was diagnosed by PCR and sequencing of the adenovirus associated virus and the adenoviruses, and as we'll see in some cases, the herpes virus that was associated with infection. So pretty good virology going on here. Adeno-associated virus type 2 was identified. Now, this virus is known, but it normally doesn't cause any diseases. So no one's really spent too much time looking at it because it wasn't particularly interesting. It didn't cause diseases. So a known virus, but not known to cause disease in the past. But it appears when it's associated, when the adeno-associated virus co-infects with an adenovirus or a herpes virus, that's when we can get this severe hepatic inflammation if the child is unlucky enough to catch both around, not necessarily at the same time, but probably at round about the same time. Adeno-associated virus 2. Now, how do the scientists know this? Well, it was detected in the plasma of all of them. 9 out of 9, it was detected in their plasma. Okay, it's not as big a sample size as we would like, but it's 9 out of 9. And the patients that had liver biopsies, obviously we don't do liver biopsies lightly. It's a fairly invasive procedure. Again, 4 out of 4 that had the liver biopsies all had the adeno-associated virus present. It was there. Normally it caused no illnesses. It requires a co-infecting helper virus to go with it. Now, age-matched controls, adenovirus-associated virus, AAV2, so the adeno-associated virus detected in the plasma of none of the 13. So that's pretty good. 100% in the infected hepatitis group, 0 in the control group. Children with adenovirus infection and normal liver function. So this is children not with the adeno-associated virus. This is children with the normal, just the adenovirus and normal liver function. Well, none of them had the adeno-associated virus 2. None of them had that, and it was detected in the plasma of 0 out of 12. Children admitted to hospital with hepatitis of other etiologies, other causes of hepatitis. Again, there was 33 of those in the study, and 0 had the adeno-associated virus. So small numbers, but as you'll see, we're dealing with 100% here. So the researchers are well aware of this, of course, and there are other reasons for believing that this is the case. The pathophysiology does make sense, the co-infections, and I'm totally convinced by this. So in other words, when they duplicate these studies in the States and in Europe, they'll get the same findings. They have got to the cause of this almost certainly. Although they do put some provisos on later, as we'll see. But this will be duplicated, I've no doubt at all. So the adeno-associated virus type 2 requires a co-infecting helper virus to replicate. So this particular virus can't reproduce on its own. It needs another virus to co-infect at the same time. The person has to be sufficiently unfortunate to get both infections at the same time, so-called helper virus. And usually this is another adenovirus, is an adenovirus, or it's a herpes virus. So usually adenovirus or a herpes virus. These two are classically known. Now, the adenovirus was detected in 6 out of 9 cases. So the adenovirus was detected in 6 out of 9 cases of people who already had the adeno-associated virus. Okay, that leaves 3, doesn't it? But of the people who had the adeno-associated virus, 3 of those had the herpes virus. So really, this is called an adeno-associated virus, which could equally well be called an adeno or herpes-associated virus. And of course, the 6 and the 3 make the full 9 who had the adeno-associated virus present. So again, pretty convincing conclusion. Now these are scientists, of course, so they're somewhat tentative. Acute non-A2E pediatric hepatitis patients, pediatric hepatitis. So that means it's not caused by A, B, C, D, E, the usual hepatitis viral infections. They say, quite rightly, is associated with the presence of adeno-associated virus 2 infection. So they can say that fairly definitively. It's associated, which could represent a primary pathogen. It could be that's what's causing the illness itself, or a useful biomarker for recent adenovirus or herpes virus infection. So you can see the scientists there not making any grandiose claims. But it looks like the adeno-associated virus, when it's co-infected with another virus, can cause the acute hepatitis, causing complete liver failure. Really nasty if this happens. Why isn't this happening in people over the age of 16? Well, they'll already have immunity to all of these viruses before. And most of these cases are younger, under the age of 5. Because the normal contact with these viruses, which are part of the normal milieu of the viral environment, because their contact with them and therefore their generating immunity to them was delayed by the measures that we took for the COVID pandemic. Now, Professor Judith Brewer, University College of London, Great Ormond Street Hospital, she says this. During the lockdown period, when children were not mixing, they were not transmitting viruses to each other. They were not building up immunity to the common infections that they would normally encounter. When the restrictions were lifted, children began to mix, viruses began to circulate freely, and they suddenly were exposed to this with lack of prior immunity to a whole battery of new infections. Professor Emma Thompson, Glasgow University. So, obviously, Professor Thompson saying larger studies are needed, which of course they are. We also need to understand more about seasonal circulation of the, keep forgetting the name, adeno-associated virus. that's not routinely monitored, so it's not routinely monitored. It may be that a peak adenovirus infection has occurred with a peak in adeno-associated viral exposure, leading to an unusual manifestation of hepatitis in susceptible young children. So there we go. That's the main. They're the main points. But I'm going to give you a bit more science for people that are interested as well. Let's just look at that in slightly more detail. Now, this one here, class 2 HLA allele. So, this particular allele. So, an allele. So, of course, as you probably know, you've got humans have one of each chromosome, 23 pairs, 46 chromosomes. An allele is a version of one of the genes on one of those chromosomes. A particular allele is a version of the gene. And they did find that there could be a genetic predisposition. Now, in most diseases, of course, it's a combination of genetic and environmental factors. So they've identified a possible genetic predisposition here. And here's the data that they give for that. This particular DRB1 allele was identified in 8 out of 9 cases. So indicating a possible genetic predisposition. That represents 89% of the children with the acute hepatitis, and data from the Scottish Blood Transfusion Service, which we have, shows a frequency of 15.6% in the general population. So it could be that this 15.6% of the population are more prone to the adenovirus-associated viral infection. That is possible. That is quite possible from this. So that would be quite a few people. Adeno-associated virus 2 may be significant. So mutations may be significant. Now, what they've found is, and again, this is somewhat speculative, but they found 9 capsid. Remember the capsid of a virus is the bit that we've looked at this so many times. It's the bit that surrounds the genetic material in the core of the virus. They found mutations in that capsid. 9 mutations overrepresented in these cases. Altered phenotype. So, as you probably know, you have a genotype is the way the genes are arranged. The phenotype is the expression of those genes in the individual, and this may have altered the behavioral and reproductive capabilities of this virus as a result of these possible associated mutational changes. So it could well be this mutational change in the virus. So altered phenotype, in other words, altered ability of the virus, including substantial evasion of neutralizing antibodies directed against wild type associated adenovirus type 2. More virus can be produced, and there can be increased virus stability. And also they did some studies in mice with the adeno-associated virus, and they found it spread throughout the body much more quickly. So it could be there's been mutations in this adeno-associated virus. Now, if that's the cause, this is more concerning because it means the adeno-associated virus has increased its virulence, and we know that the adenoviruses and the herpes viruses are everywhere all the time anyway. So that would be concerning if we are dealing with a more virulent potential hepatitis inducing virus. That's the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is that everyone's immunity will rapidly catch up. Where it's going to be between those two extremes, we don't yet know. If you want a bit further information, just a bit of background reading, just a couple, one from University of Glasgow there and one from UK Research and Innovation. And of course, we always post all of these links so that you can check out the evidence for yourself. So pretty convincing. Adeno-associated virus type 2 does seem to be it's highly associated with and almost certainly is causing these hepatitis infections in children when co-infected with adenovirus and herpes virus. So that's the likely answer to that. This will be confirmed, we expect, pretty soon by additional data. If there's any data that contradicts that, of course, we'll talk about this, but that's the position at the moment. So hard to know what to do about it, really. No vaccines for this at the moment. Children, of course, mix. It's what children do. So there probably will be more cases of this. Obviously, practice good hygiene as much as you can with children, but it's difficult, of course, especially with children under the age of 5. Very difficult. So that's the current state of science on that, and thank you for watching.